I would like to call the June 14th, 2023 Community and Economic Development Committee to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Chair Edson,
Here.
Vice Chair Pryor,
Here.
Councilmember Hodges,
Here.
Councilmember Felker, Planning Commissioner Arth.
Here.
Councilmember Felker should be coming in pretty soon. Would you please let the record reflect when he comes in? Thank you. Before we get started and move on to approval of the agenda, I've got some agenda management to do. We are going to reorganize the agenda Item D, which is TMP-2620, will be item A, or I'm sorry, item B, right after the approval of the action letter, sorry. And then we will move on to the incentive policy and the presentation of ADUs. Do I have that correct? All right. All right, thank you.
ADUs, then the incentive policy.
Okay, that's why, okay. So we're going D, C, B, correct? Okay, everybody have that? DCB. ADCB, sorry, I did not include A. This committee's already getting off to a grand start. All right. All right, so let's move on to the approval of the agenda. Could I have a motion, please? Approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Pryor and a second by Councilmember Hodges to approve the agenda as changed. Could I have a roll call, please?
Vice Chair Pryor.
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Chair Edson.
Aye. Thank you. Do we have any public comments before we start? I don't see any public comments. Okay. Next item of business is item A, 2023-5706, approval of the May 10th Community and Development Action Letter. Could I have a motion, please?
I move to approve the May 10th action letter.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Pryor and a second by Councilmember Hodges to approve the May 10th, 2023 action letter. Could I have roll call, please?
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Chair Edson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Pryor.
Aye.
Thank you. And now we have the new item B, which is TMP-2620, an ordinance approving a grant agreement between the City of Lee Summit, Missouri, and the Missouri Department of Economic Development for Community Revitalization Matching Grant Program funding in order to build a new youth center for Prodeo Youth Center. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Amy Kahneman. I'm the Administration Manager for Development Services. For your consideration tonight is a grant agreement between the Missouri Department of Economic Development and the City of Lee Summit for $685,000. I'm hoping to give you some background, and then I can take questions if that's all right. Last October, I was at a Leadership Lee Summit event speaking to various nonprofits and asking about their needs, and I came across an organization called Prodeo Youth Center. I met Elaine Metcalf, Prodeo's executive director, who's here with me tonight, and she shared with me that they had secured a sizable donation and were looking to couple it with grant funding to potentially construct their own building. Prodeo is currently leasing a space out of New Beginnings Church and serves Lee Summit teens by providing free tutoring and counseling to those who are homeless, hungry, suicidal, depressed, or have experienced a traumatic life event. Unfortunately, that lease space has a maximum occupancy of 44, so they're limited on how many teens they can serve at one time. Learning all of this, I told Elaine I'd keep my eyes out for any grant funding that came my way. The next morning, I saw an email that was forwarded from my boss from the mayor about a community revitalization matching grant program created by DED with ARPA funding. The deadline was in a month, but the mayor expressed a desire for staff to come up with some project ideas that really met the intent of the grant. So I pitched the Prodeo Youth Center project, and both my supervisor and the mayor were in favor, and Elaine was interested, so we pursued it. No city funding is being spent on the project other than some of my time, and a lot of the donation Prodeo secured was used as the match for the project, so there's $685,000 of a donation plus $685,000 of a matching grant, which gives us a total project cost of $1.37 million. So Prodeo will purchase the property at 902 Southeast Douglas, and then students will literally have a short walk over from Lee Summit High School, and they'll be able to get their services. Prodeo had a pre-app meeting with the development services staff, which verified the zoning was appropriate for the intended use, and the project was viewed favorably for the location. So we found out at the end of March, that we did receive the award, and only 70 projects were awarded out of 203 applications from across the state of Missouri. So we're very excited about this project, and we really hope it will come to life if the contract gets approved by City Council. So similarly to the CDBG program that I oversee, the city will enter into a grant agreement with the Missouri Department of Economic Development, and then the city will enter into a subrecipient grant agreement with Prodeo. So Prodeo will really run the project. They will secure the land, they'll get their own design professional and builder, and the city, me, with the help of our law department, will help ensure that they stay in compliance with DED's requirements, all of which will be stated in that subrecipient grant agreement. So this will be Prodeo's building at the end, not the city's, and we will have no responsibility for any kind of ongoing maintenance or operating expenses once the building is finished. The deadline to spend the funding is September 2026. So if all goes as planned, we're hoping in about 14 months, they'll have the ability to occupy a new building and also the ability to serve more teens in our community as well. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the committee members, comments? No? Isn't Dr. Metcalf going to come up and speak?
She wasn't planning to, but I'm sure she would be happy to.
Just an ordinance. So.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to just say how grateful I am that Amy approached me about this opportunity. So in a very short amount of time, 1 month, we put this grant together and worked collaboratively on it. It was wonderful. You know, grants, you get about 50% of them that you write, and I write a lot of grants to keep the doors open at Prodeo. So this was such a long shot. So when we received that news in March, it was truly an amazing day for us because a permanent home where teens can feel safe and loved and keep learning beyond the bell, that's kind of what Prodeo is all about, is pretty cool to have one in our community and just down the street on Douglas Street. So yeah, it's pretty great. We're hoping that with the approval of the grant, we'll move into maybe a 4,000 square feet space. So with the capacity to serve middle and high school students. So I don't know about you, but one teen suicide is one too many in a community. And if we can find a place to make these teens feel safe and at home, everybody should be behind it. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, and I knew asking you to speak would be beneficial to all of us.
Got a passion for it.
Thank you. Comments, Councilmember Pryor?
Thank you. So we hosted we didn't host it, but they had a bonfire in our backyard last summer, maybe? And they were some of the kindest, most respectful kids at Prodeo. They were all so I'm excited for this project. Thank you.
Anybody else? No, I think receiving this grant, especially on that timeline and the size of the grant, really says a lot about the organization. So congratulations, this is great. Can I have a motion, please?
Chair,
Councilmember Hodges.
I move to recommend to City Council approval of agenda item TMP-2620, an ordinance approving a grant agreement between the City of Lee Summit, Missouri and the Missouri Department of Economic Development for community revitalization, matching grant program funding in order to help build a new youth center for Prodeo Youth Center.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Hodges and a second by Councilmember Pryor to recommend this to council for approval. Can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Edson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Pryor,
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges,
Aye.
Councilmember Felker.
Aye.
And it passes, thank you. Councilmember Felker, that was the last item on the agenda, so. And now we're moving on to item 2023-5705, presentation on accessory dwelling units. Thank you.
Thank you.
that showing for everybody now? Great. So good evening. I'm Amy Nassif, Deputy Director for Development, here to continue our discussion on the accessory dwelling units. And just want to start a little bit with brief history of kind of our timeline together and our collaboration with you to date and how we got started. As you know, our Ignite Comprehensive Plan has all of our future plan elements for us, establishing our vision for our community growth and development. And one of those areas is our strong neighborhoods and housing choice. In that focus is one of our goals for maintaining the thriving quality neighborhoods to connect diversity of residents throughout the community. And within that, and we have a link to our dashboard here as well, it discusses how can we strengthen our current accessory dwelling unit ordinance, those regulations, while protecting and preserving our neighborhood and community. So that's how we kind of started this journey with you all. Our first meeting was February 9th of actually 2022, where we initiated those discussions just shortly after the Ignite Comprehensive Plan. And that was then where our direction was to gather that research, start researching, seeing what other cities do, and start preparing some language just for discussion purposes with you all. Came back in November, and then with some other priority items and agenda items, then returned again February. And that's then in February where we continued that research, answered some questions, and also did the community survey. And you may see from the staff report we prepared, we also provided links for all the past meeting dates as well for you if you would like to have seen like those presentations or anything as well to help you. And then April 12th was our last time together. And real quickly also, just if it helps as well, the accessory dwelling units, when we're speaking of those, we're talking about single accessory dwelling residential units on an existing lot that are either attached either laterally or with a garage or detached on a single family lot. So in April, when we met last, the direction from the CEDC was to clarify some of our language requirements. Also asked about what is the property value impact on the neighboring properties, not the properties that may have an ADU themselves, but what is the financial impact to our next door neighbors. We did a lot of research in that regard, checked with AARP, ULI, the Missouri Realtor Association, Kansas City area, and so forth. And to date, there's actually no data or research or study on that specific item that we were told or we have found. What we did find, though, from various groups and sources was that typically for the residential lot that might have the ADU actually on it, their property value can increase by 20 to 30%. And then the other request for direction from our April meeting was to update the location allowances. There was a lot of discussion about where this should be located and where we want that focus to be. And basically the three areas were either located in the old downtown Lee Summit area, which is where we have that map included for you in your packet tonight, or on properties that are half acre in size or larger, but also have the zoning of ag, RDR, RLL, RP1, or R1, or other properties, provided they do that through review and approval process of the full PDP process. So that would be going through full planning commission and through city council vetting. And so that is the impacts. Those are the red line changes that we have in the ordinance draft for you this evening. Also, just to kind of help discussion and give a little bit of synthesis to how we got here as well, is tried to put together a little chart for you. So one of the things I think is important to remember is that we do currently have an ADU ordinance. The concern and problem with it right now is it's in 3 to 4 different chapters and sections of our code. So super difficult for the general public to understand, for anyone to really understand, look at, and understand what our regulations are. It's also used, we have various terms that we use to it. So that's being cleaned up, which is really great. There's also currently no height limitation. So currently an ADU can be a lot taller than the primary structure. The current draft language has verbiage in there that would restrict, so an ADU could not exceed the height of a principal structure, which is really common in what most ADU ordinances. We also currently don't really have a maximum of how many ADUs on a lot, so this would have a restriction on 1 per lot. The size, there's no current size restriction, so that's something that we've addressed as well. And a big topic of discussion, the last two, were there's currently no architecture or design requirements, and it's really important while you may encourage the ADUs, you don't want to change the character of the lot itself or of the neighborhood. So we have compatibility language from an architectural standpoint now addressed, or at least in the language. And then the second conversation had focused a lot on wanting to prohibit short-term rentals. Did not want ADUs to turn into short-term rentals or vacation or Airbnbs. We currently do not have a prohibition on that. So that has been something that's also been added to that draft language for everyone. There was continued discussion at our April meeting also about some other items like parking and what other neighbors or people may think. And from that conversation, it evolved that, you know, it's with this being the second or third kind of iteration of a draft, it may be a great time at this point to go ahead and get started with the public hearing process so that we could get feedback from the full planning commission, feedback from wider audience members besides the surveys that we had done, but continue the discussions. So when we are ready to go ahead and schedule for that planning commission public hearing, our research and our draft, it doesn't stop. Those conversations don't end. It's just we continue to evolve those, but in the different setting. So we are prepared and ready when to go ahead and get that schedule started, to have a public hearing, if that's the direction tonight. And then it will, of course, return back to city council. So still lots more opportunities for discussion and really vetting and evolving where we land with the ordinance. So I think that was everything I had for this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. This was great, and the chart I found enormously helpful.
Oh, good.
Also, just for anyone here or watching, the committee has changed since the last time we discussed this. So we'll see, and that's another reason for this presentation. We're continuing to talk, but we've changed by half. So now we're getting new thoughts and new voices. And so I will open it up for discussion and questions. Okay, go back to your chart, please.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to ask one real quick.
And the chart is not, I tried to capture the main topic points that were areas that the people asked questions and areas that could make the most sense, but it wasn't a verbatim line by line, but I tried to capture the majority of it. Hopefully that helps provide a guide or a map.
Oh, yeah, this was very helpful. I just want to clarify something. On the top one under zoning, under the proposed requirement, all residential zoning with PDP approval. So if I want to make sure I have this correct and we're going in the same direction that we talked about, because we talked about New Longview having ADUs. So to me, what this means is if a project comes forward with ADUs built in, like a New Longview or some other project, and they go through the PDP process, then we can include ADUs like that, if we so choose. I just want to make sure I've got the meaning correct. I'm trying to clarify the meaning of all residential zoning with PDP approval.
Yes, that is correct. Longview was one of the examples from the last meeting of, do we want to have an opportunity just to consider something?
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, and I was just clarifying that for the new people in the committee. Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you. So I may have overlooked it, but what's the minimum lot size for places like the downtown core?
So for downtown, there was no minimum lot size. For downtown, it was just the district. It has to be a residential district.
It could be a tiny yard and someone could decide to cram an ADU on there?
If you have to meet the setback requirements and the 60% impervious area and everything else.
So, okay, let me,
Yeah.
so give us, I'm trying to say, make Councilmember Pryor, give her some idea of what that looks like. I mean, if you.
Sure, let me show you So there was a lot of discussion last time of if we should include a zoning district requirement or an acreage size or not. And I apologize, I think it needs a second to wake up, because I have the map here for you.
Because, yeah, I see I understand your concern.
Let me try, yeah.
Of course, that doesn't mean it has to be a separate ADU either. That could also mean somebody has
It could be
a
interior, it could be
garage.
in their basement, the garage could be converted. Here you are.
Yeah.
Here's the map. So this is the map we did. So it still has to be a residential district. It can't be a commercial district, but, and again, this was just from the last discussions that we had, so it definitely can evolve and keep changing.
So with the setback requirements and everything, what typically would a lot size have to be to meet all the requirements?
So our requirements are fairly robust in how they relate to other requirements throughout the Kansas City area. So, I mean, if you have an in R1, I'm just going to give you an example. An R1 lot is, say, a minimum 8,400 square feet in size. You're still going to have to meet the primary setback requirements on that. Can't be in front of the house. You have to be, like, I think the rear yard was 20 feet. Let me pull that part back up for you. So, and you still have an impervious area that you cannot exceed of more than 60 feet or 60% of the area. You have it up in advance and then it goes to sleep on you because you don't wake it up. So let me try it this way too. So it still would be very difficult. And I think you're really probably limited to more of you have to almost have like a 10,000 square foot lot. But unless, again, you want to do it above your garage. So you also have to make sure that you still have parking met as well. So the other requirement was if you have a separate structure or even add an ADU, you have to accommodate and provide a parking space for that, and it can't take away from the parking that was already required too. So you have a lot of challenges there.
I guess my biggest concern is I love downtown Lee Summit. I love how it is right now. I don't want it to change a ton with people essentially ruining our neighborhoods, putting in structures that really the yard's too small and they're cramming a structure on a particular yard. And if everyone does that on an entire street, then that's going to drastically change our neighborhoods in town and downtown. Not only that, but we still have so many stormwater issues that would drastically increase our stormwater issues. So I will say, I'm not opposed to ADUs. I am opposed to not getting it completely correct right now before we just okay these. So that is a big concern of mine, living downtown. I see what goes on downtown, and I don't want, I mean, and it just takes one person to somehow figure out how to put an ADU and meet those requirements on a small lot, and that's my big concern.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, Councilman,
Just to add a little bit here, currently right now for, let's say an accessory structure like that, a shed would be an allowed use if it's not prohibited, which would have the same kind of impact that you're speaking of, or a detached garage. Those all have regulations, that are currently in place that would allow those type of accessory buildings on a lot if that lot was of adequate size with setbacks and things like that. So I think the concern about ADUs specifically from a building perspective, it is kind of already taken care of by the setback ordinances and the 60% maximum on the open space or on the impervious area requirements. And really the ADU aspect is more of a use discussion, and that is, are you comfortable with the use of the accessory dwelling unit versus, say, a garage or a shed or something like that?
Okay, I guess I just don't want downtown to be an experiment, then it doesn't go right, and then we realize, oh, it's not working out, and then it's harder to undo something that's already in place than it is to just get it right. And so I understand what you're saying, but I do have concerns with still all of that. And I guess I'll let other people bring up their concerns, because I just forgot what else I was gonna say. Oh, so with this, would it still require coming before council, or does this just do like an overlay and then they don't have to come before council anymore at all?
It comes,
And they just do administratively?
it'd be administrative as a building permit, unless you're outside of downtown or unless you're not on that half acre or larger site. Then it would be a PDP that goes through planning commission and city council.
So if you are in the core of downtown, you no longer will have to come before council. You just do it all administratively, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I
You're
personally
not
would,
coming to city council now unless I'm mistaken. There's no city, they
Okay.
don't come to city council now. Yeah,
for an ADU,
no, for downtown.
that one,
Or does it? Yeah,
okay.
That's
But-
a loft
that's
dwelling
the
unit.
law for a loft or a guest house.
Yeah, and that's currently allowed.
And that's currently allowed, and so they don't have to.
So Shannon McGuire, staff planner. The case you're thinking of that was in downtown that came before you for a PDP had to come before you because of modification request with regards to the size of a detached garage on a separate lot. So that's why that one came before you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm not against ADUs. I just don't want I just want to get it right. So I would like to see a minimum lot size just to make sure. And even what's the average lot size in Lee Summit or in downtown, do you know? I feel like Ryan would know if he knows everything.
So our standard zoning district, like was mentioned, it currently has a 70 by 120 foot lot width. So minimum lot width of 70 feet, depth of 120 feet. That being said, the downtown's a little bit different because the downtown has been platted since 1865. So there's a wide variety of different size lots. There's everything from smaller 40, 50 foot lots all the way up to, the lots that are an acre plus in downtown. So I don't know that off the top of my head, but I will say that is definitely some information that we can pull and put a map to, and maybe with some colors on some general size ranges, so you can kind of take a look and see what that looks like. But we'd have to do we'd have to get Mr. McGuire to get into the GIS system and create us a map.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hodges.
So I think one thing that I'm not I'm not a fan of ADUs, first off. Just the idea of them, and then when you said that there's no real data yet as to whether or not the impact on neighbors and their property value, that kind of scares me, because I'm thinking if I'm somebody who doesn't care to have an ADU, neighbors get one, that's going to affect me, but we're like, oh, well, let's just experiment, and then it's at my expense. And I don't think that that's fair to our community to be doing that, whether it's downtown Lee Summit or over in the Paddock or Lakewood, whatever. Second, I guess maybe somebody should explain to me why. I mean, I know downtown Lee Summit, we're dealing with it differently, but I guess my question is why? Again, I'm thinking if I'm putting myself here in downtown Lee Summit and rules were different for downtown than for my neighborhood, why is that? Because I'm thinking I'm moving in with the intention of having my house, my neighbor, not having multiple extra neighbors that I wasn't banking on when I moved there. So I guess what is the thinking of dealing with downtown a lot differently, like they're a separate entity from the whole city? I know it's a different vibe, but what is the reasoning for excluding them from rules?
Well, and I'll just take that, because I don't want it to feel like staff is just taking direction from the last committee.
Sure, yeah.
And so it was really, I believe that's where we're seeing more requests for them. And the lot sizes vary more and are larger in downtown than a lot of other places in town.
Okay.
But you guys, this is all discussion and presentation. So one, if this committee goes, we don't want ADUs, we're not ready for this, we don't want them anywhere, fine. If this committee goes, we only want them downtown, or we don't want them downtown at all, fine. Uh-oh, Shannon's gonna come down and tell me I'm wrong. So I just want to make that clear. And so everything she's presenting is not staff bringing it,
Sure.
but it was from the last committee and our discussions, okay?
Okay.
So, that's why you see like the proposed requirements and the zoning and everything, okay? I just wanted to clarify that, okay?
So I can ask questions though, right? Like, okay, that's, okay. So another one of my questions is, I know you said that we're not doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I took it as not doing Airbnbs and short-term rentals, was that right?
Correct.
Okay, so thinking in those terms, what prevents somebody from doing that? Like, what guidelines do we have set up or would be set up to make sure that that did not happen, or if it was found out that it was happening, or like what safeguards do we have against that?
Great. That's a great question. So right now, currently, our ADU ordinance does not prohibit short-term rentals, so people can do that now. That is permitted right now.
Okay.
With the proposed draft, it would restrict that and say it's prohibited from doing that. And so the only reason you have that short-term rental, that really small Exhibit B, that ordinance in front of you is just to make sure they both sync. So we were proposing in the ADU ordinance, we said short-term rentals are not allowed in an ADU. We then we wanted to then make sure it was consistent, so the short-term rental section of our code, we just said ADUs are not allowed. But currently, you can.
Okay, so we don't,
So we
do
do
we
not
plan to
have-
have anything in place though, since that's what we're saying that we won't allow?
If this moving forward, this would be that prohibition.
Okay, so but what I'm saying is like, what will we have in place if this is gonna be what we go off of? What will we have in place to make sure that that's not happening then?
Oh, then that would be like a use, sorry.
Okay,
Go ahead. I would just say, yeah, that would be a violation of the zoning code. 100% honesty, it is very difficult to enforce. I think that's not a surprise to anybody. It is a challenging section of code to enforce across the country right now. That being said, if we're aware of a violation, then we would issue a notice of violation and go through the abatement process with that. We've had several conversations about our municipal code violation process and what tools we have available to us associated with that, and it would follow that standard process. And that is, we're really limited in any additional type of enforcement. If they cease the activity, then they're no longer in violation.
okay. Okay, that part kind of scares me too, because I feel like it's something that could get out of hand very quickly. And I can understand why people would want to make extra revenue or whatever. But another question I had was,
Councilmember Hodges?
yeah,
If I may, just on that note, we put the short-term rental ordinance in place, I want to say in 2017.
okay,
And it's somewhere around that range, 17, 18. And I think in that timeframe, there was a complaint as to what led to that ordinance. I can't recall any additional complaints regarding Airbnbs
Okay.
that we've had since then.
thank you.
We also checked, that's a great point, we checked to see if we've had any complaints or issues regarding any existing ADUs, and we have not.
Okay. And then I wanted to go to the part where you were talking about downtown ADUs again. So let me make sure I wrote these down right. Only for attached. So you said separate building must have large lot. So for the ADUs that can be attached, are there parking requirements for those as well, or only for separate ADUs not attached?
Regardless if it's attached or detached,
Okay.
they have to provide the parking.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then I just wanted to put out there too, that in my opinion, if we were gonna go the route of ADUs, I personally think it should be a 1 acre or more. I think the half acre, we're gonna look like very busy, busier than we already look downtown. I think it can look trashy real fast. So that's just my opinion of the 1 acre, but I think that's all I've got for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Felker.
Thank you. Could we put back on the screen that, although this is really good too, but put back on the screen the chart. Thank you. I appreciate the work and effort to try to give us information to consider and think about. And even having a proposal, I think, is good, because then we start saying, okay, does this work? Does it not work? Do we poke holes in it? Do we expand it? Do we narrow it? Do we throw it out? So I think it's great to have this to go through. So just a few follow-ups on the, first was just this conversation we had just a second ago on violation, not knowing what you said what our remedies are. Mr. Elam, someone violates the short-term rental prohibition, if we had one, then we give them notice of the violation, and then they don't comply, what is the next step? Is it, you're filing suit for just to stop the action? Is there a monetary implication? Is there a fine involved?
So any fines for municipal violations are handed out through the municipal court system. So it would be a notice of violation, and our goal with all municipal code violations is abatement through our neighborhood services division. Now, once that is abated,
And when you say abate, just to stop it, right? Just for the lack of better, just to
lack of
stop
better
the
term,
violation.
In
Layman's
this
terms.
instance, it would be stop doing that.
Yep, got it.
Yeah, and then, there potentially could be, if there's a repeat offender type of situations that would potentially go to municipal court. Again, those are very difficult, again, and with a municipal code violation or property maintenance code, a zoning code, those things like that, you have a 10-day abatement period. So you get issued a notice of violation, you have 10 days to comply. Okay. So if somebody has, let's say somebody has an Airbnb rented for a weekend, we issue a notice of violation.
Oh, they're done in 2 days.
They're done in 2 days, and then they say, we don't have we're not running an Airbnb right now.
And then 10 days later, they do it again.
Doing it again, that's a new violation, new clock starts. That's where the enforcement of this becomes very, very challenging for us overall, because of the type of violation that it is.
I mean, our mechanism we'd have to change the mechanism for dealing with it. Meaning, is there a reason they even get 10 days? Why do we have a 10-day notice period? Is there some?
I believe a lot of it's state statute,
Yeah.
due process.
Due process notice requirements
Okay.
that are sent out typically, from state statute. We don't send you a lot of violations, so he wouldn't know, That's
true.
fine, yeah.
Okay. Interesting, okay. So I guess that would be important for the committee to know, actually, what restrictions do we have? Like, if we have, I think that's part of maybe what's being felt in some sense is, if ADUs were authorized and if there's the potential for short-term rentals to happen, are there really, what are those limitations? Because I don't know, and knowing what they are would be helpful.
Yeah, and it depends, so if you're talking about a use violation, then that's what, Ryan was speaking to, or, previously about the notice of violation and going to court. We currently, let me just put it this way, we currently allow ADUs without much regulation. We don't have architecture regs, we don't have height limitations, they can have as many as they want, there's no size restriction or anything. If we adopted these updated, some updated regulations, say that in the current ones, they do have architecture requirements put in, and we do have a size, then not just a use violation, then you're also possibly, issues with, your building permit not in compliance, or we have that mechanism where if they submit for a building permit and it's over this, 1,000 square foot gross area, we can deny it. Whereas now we don't have anything in place because there's no size restriction. Does that help or kind of answer that for you?
That's helpful. Again, just context here. We're trying to flesh out. It would give us more to manage and respond.
Gives us almost more control in that sense, because then we can physically see on the, hey, that height's too tall, we're not approving this, you're denied. Or when we're out in the field doing those inspections, we can catch it, as opposed to now when there's just,
And right now, for clarity's sake, you mentioned under current requirement zoning, and obviously there's some setback requirements, so forth now, but what's permitted downtown is simply above a garage or above, and anyone can do it as long as it's above the garage. But any other kind of ADU downtown, not permitted or not prohibited,
they're not outright prohibited, that's correct.
okay? But you would have, what Ryan, Mr. Elam was saying earlier, there are some other exterior structures that we're governed.
Yes,
The ADU would be governed by those same types of restrictions for putting a shed or something else. But someone could put the shed up and someone lives back there.
and we may not know, yes. I mean,
Are they prohibited from letting someone live back there?
Yes, that would be the use violation.
That's the use.
violation.
That's the use violation.
Got it, okay.
And just, I will say that we've had examples where, if somebody's building an accessory building, for example, we're inspecting that if it's over 120 square feet. So if it's over 120 square feet and there starts to be features that show up in that design and construction that would lend itself towards a residential use or some sort of different occupancy than what they told us originally, we do have those conversations with them. And there's been a couple of instances where they've had to change construction midway.
And those things would be like sinks, toilets, I mean, is that what you're talking about? Something
Yeah.
that would say you could live there?
Yeah.
correct. That it makes it habitable.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And so then we talk about the architectural requirements. So the way that is governed is the person building or rehabbing the structure would be required to present those plans before they proceed.
Correct.
And if they fail to do so, well, then again, you have, if we learn of that, we then have the conversations to address that and may enforce either the lack of permit or some other,
Or
again,
no TCO or something, yeah, we can stop.
sorry, TCO.
I'm sorry, temporary certificate of
Thank
occupancy.
you. I should
TCO.
know that.
I
but
apologize.
I know I should, but I'm like, okay, I got lots of acronyms in my head, so ADU, TCO. Okay. And I guess a question I had, and if this has been discussed, I have watched some of the prior, but not all of the prior conversations on this. Other municipalities that have a robust ordinance on ADUs, do we know of any where, and since we're talking a lot about downtown, I would say, well, and does such an ordinance have a different mechanism for that other municipalities downtown? Could we see how that experiment, since that's kind of how we were talking about, this might be, it's different for us, we see how it's going there. So is there a municipality or multiple ones we could look at?
In a past life, I wrote someone's zoning code for them about 8 months ago.
Okay,
And it may have been on accessory dwelling units. And
Okay.
it was pretty robust and pretty restrictive. It was also very well done.
okay.
I'd like
Where
to have
where was
them
it?
step.
Where was it at?
So Latha, Kansas has, about 8 months ago, they did an accessory dwelling unit ordinance. And so we had about this many regulations, and we expanded them greatly and added architecture, character of neighborhoods, setbacks, and made a lot of really clear requirements, very similar to things here now. And when we did that in that past, we did not get an increased influx of any permits actually coming in. It made the requirements much more clear and transparent, but in the same sense,
Made it so hard that they didn't do
it
it.
kind of made it more difficult, made it more, the quality and the expectation was there, because you didn't want to do anything, you wanted to preserve and protect your existing neighborhood and the community, while being open and having a mechanism to permit them at the same time. So, there's that, Overland Park has one, which is fairly similar, pretty robust one in Lawrence, Kansas. Blue Springs has some regulations, not quite as much as these here, and so do some Independence in other areas. But this one proposed here is more on the more detailed side, I would say, if that makes sense as well.
Okay. And I think that's,
And we could
since you-
provide you with a chart on that or something
Yeah,
if you like to.
since you know
sure.
about them, I mean, I'm guessing and assuming that that's informing kind of how you're looking at this and how it would play out actually in what our downtown looks like. Given the fact that we have all kinds of different lot sizes, I'm not sure that there's a way to transport it and apply it exactly. It's probably not the same.
It's not apples to apples. Most other ordinances actually don't designate. What we always do when we first look at research is we look nationally and locally, right? Because what have other cities done? What's out there? What's working? What doesn't work, you know? And then we talk to our peers and our peer communities and such. Some of the local communities, I have not seen many have separate for downtown, but not everyone has, like the kind of downtown, the size and shape that we do as well. But we can definitely look into that part further as well, and also get the map with some of the average sizes and size lots and things like that to see what maybe we're really talking about when we're talking about downtown. Is it really, 100% of the area that's zoned residential, or is it really just a really small portion that might end up being able to meet all of our requirements that are proposed right now, or what that kind of looks like?
So I'll just, comments? Do you want me to make comments?
Before you move on,
Yes, that's fine.
could somebody from staff go adjust the air? It's about 45 degrees up here, and I'm watching people turn blue. That'd be great, thank you.
Who wants my
We were
coat?
trying to keep you awake from the amazing presentation we're trying to do. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Felker?
No, it's fine. You were thinking people are going to fall asleep when I kept talking, is what I, no, that's actually why they have the cold on. I appreciate the proposed requirements. I'm not opposed entirely to ADUs. I think that I can kind of appreciate Councilmember Pryor talking about, just being concerned about what's the impact. And I think the more we can flesh that out, the better, I think, more comfortable we'll be. And obviously, as you demonstrated a few moments ago, this is just part of the process. Nothing's in place yet. I'm not sure what I think about half acre or larger. I mean, like, again, maybe is there 3/4 an acre, 1 acre? I don't know. I'd have to kind of put my visuals around that to see what makes sense for me, and I'm not in a position to say whether that size is the right size. And obviously the setbacks and all that, I think put limitations around it. So I think the more you could kind of show us how, you mentioned Olathe as perhaps being one you're most familiar with, but seeing, whether there were some elements of that help us see how it can be a good thing within the constraints that are maintain character, maintain integrity of a neighborhood, don't lead to, kind of explosion of something. And I think that's the concern, at least that I would share with what's already been said. So I'm not opposed to them. I think that having some very thoughtful requirements is essential if we want to move forward with it. And most of these seem good to me in terms of trying to put some reasonable limitations on it. Not exceeding the height of the principal structure. Again, things that just kind of make sense, that don't throw us into having wildly different looking structures going up. So, Chair, that's what I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Arth?
So with the ADUs, if properties are in an HOA, that can stop ADUs right in their tracks.
Yes.
Okay, so I remember, I think it was in 2017 when we had the Airbnb, someone was using their home for that, and they wanted a special use permit, and their HOA, I don't know if it was silent on it or prohibited it, but I just remember, so that made me think about the HOAs. So the areas that would have to be focused on are probably a lot of areas in downtown without HOAs. That's really the primary concerns, because most of Lee Summit, probably the residential is in an HOA. Okay, I was just, because that makes the risk of all that the concerns go down at least to a certain area. Thank
Councilmember Pryor, back to you.
Thank you. Yes, and I think that's one of the things that concerns me is downtown doesn't have an HOA to protect them, so it's kind of an experiment here, I feel like. So if someone has a shed, can they still do an ADU, or is that considered a building and they cannot do an ADU? Or if someone has a garage, can they do an ADU, or what? I know it says with this proposed requirement, it would be one per lot. Does that,
So right now, if you're like, for instance, in our agriculture district or anything, then you can do that. And there's no restriction to how many you have on your lot. So with the proposed, like, this is a really good, with the proposed ordinance, it makes it clear, like, that you can either be detached or attached. All the different examples here, you could be in the lower level of your house, like your basement, above your garage, provided you don't exceed the height of your primary structure, or a garage, full garage conversion.
so if someone does, say they wanted to do an attached, regardless, if they have a shed in their backyard with this proposed order, or the proposal, could the proposed requirements, could they do, so if they have a shed, could they still build an ADU?
If they have a shed and they're using their shed as a current ADU,
If they're using it as a shed?
as a shed, then if they can meet the size, the impervious area requirements, the setback requirements, the zoning district, the size,
So what if they have like a detached garage? Then could they do a separate ADU?
they could, provided they meet the setbacks.
Okay,
and
as long as
don't
they're using
meet
that
the
as a garage.
maximum,
Okay.
yeah. And that maximum impervious area is there too, and they have to accommodate and find a place for parking. So there's a lot more restrictions and that they,
So the only reason I was
Go through,
asking is
yeah.
to see if it just meant, it said one, I didn't know if it meant like one detached building per lot, or if it just meant one accessory dwelling unit per lot. So it just means one accessory dwelling unit
the
per lot.
proposed is one ADU per lot.
Okay. And then, is there anything, and you kind of addressed this, is there anything in this, or anything not in this, that is in Olathe that you've seen?
Not that I don't believe so. I think I think there's
Pretty much
pretty much
covers it.
everything. And we didn't try to necessarily like mirror it off there, but just when we were hearing some of the questions from previously and some of the concerns, you know, again, just looking back, we were looking back at what other cities have that language, like the architecture, you know, and things like that. And it wasn't not a like for like, but just taking some of those ideas from other neighboring communities, but.
Well, and I think
I
looking at
don't think
Olathe
there's
is
anything
great.
in
They're
there.
growing and they're doing something right, because they're growing pretty quick.
We had a really good code writer. Just kidding. But yeah, and again, there was no, they didn't end up with an influx. It didn't open doors. It actually kind of also put everyone on notice, like, hey, if you're going to do this, there's a high standard and a high quality, and we didn't get a lot after that, and neither did some of those other communities that I had talked to as well.
And I definitely
Yeah.
like having the more black and white rules versus currently, it doesn't seem like there's really any rules. So I definitely like having that. My big thing is I just don't want to see I just don't want to see downtown losing the charm of downtown. And that's why I'd say most people live down here, is because what it is currently, and I don't want to see it change. But I definitely think it's important to do a lot of these proposed requirements as long as we can get it right, because I would like to see those. And it's easier for, so like proactive codes, how many proactive codes officers do we have? 3?
3 plus supervisor, so 4 total
Okay.
in development services.
So I'm sure this would make their job a lot easier too. But I do have a question. So you were saying short-term rentals are really hard to regulate. So does that mean essentially everywhere in the city, they can do a short-term rental if they want, and as long as it's done within 2?
It's difficult to enforce.
Oh, yeah, hard, okay.
They're not allowed in areas that they're not allowed in. So,
But in downtown, they're only allowed within a mile of the core of downtown, right? Or is it?
I don't think it's within a mile of the core. I'd have to look the actual ordinance language up on there. Shannon might know a little bit more off the top of his head.
You must be licensed and it's located with, thank you. Put my glasses on, it's right here. Located within the Old Town Master Plan Development Area.
So that's everything.
They have to be
inside that
greater than
red.
1 acre in size or located within the Old Town Master Development Plan area.
Okay, so that's everything inside the red circle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the one other item too that I don't have on the chart or anything, if it's helpful, another thing that we're proposing with the updated is that the owner must continue to live on the principal structure, cannot sell it, cannot subdivide, and things like that too. So that helps prevent some effect of they leave and now they're just renting both structures, or they try to subdivide and then sell. So we have that restriction in the proposal too,
Okay, that's good.
as a way to help to try to address some of those things.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Chair,
Oh, Councilmember Philbrook.
comment or suggestion. I think it might be helpful if something like this exists, or if you've done something like this before, if you might have, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 slides that do like a case study where you can have kind of like an image, even like not an actual perhaps aerial image, but so that's a nice pretty picture, but like showing here's the lot.
Oh, the whole lot?
Yeah,
Sure.
pick a few lots in downtown Lee Summit well, here's a big one, here's a small one. How would this actually play out if someone attempted to do it? I mean, I don't know what kind of work that entails, but I think that's probably part of what leads to discomfort about the whole idea is just how do you visualize it? Like, what would it look like? And maybe it's as bad as we think it would be. Maybe it's better than we think it would be. So given the requirements that you've laid out, okay, let's see how it would actually apply in the different scenarios. I think that would provide you as staff, whether you're talking to this committee, to planning commission, or the council as a whole, I think that will bear fruit in terms of generating more discussion, having more productive dialogue about those restrictions, so.
If I can add to that, one of the restrictions in there is the overall size, so we limit it to 1,000 square feet or 50% of the principal structure size. So if you take into account, a smaller lot's typically gonna have a smaller house, so it's the lesser of the two. So smaller house, smaller lot's gonna make a smaller ADU. And then again, you still have to meet all the setback requirements as well.
So we couldn't really design it or anything probably, but we could grab 2 or 3
Yeah,
parcels and just,
again,
like, where could it fit?
Yes.
Physically, just to see the site layout.
I think it would just be it'd be helpful to present it a couple times. Yeah, if that could be something done for a future review of this, I think that will give council members and others a chance to kind of work through the idea.
Sure,
Thanks.
thank you. And just where you're talking about just a average property in downtown, or just any?
Yeah, I
we'll
mean,
just do anyway. Okay.
well, and part of what I didn't realize there was such variation in lot size in downtown. I guess I probably could assume that driving around, but, pick 1 or 2 that are different sizes. Okay, could you even put one on certain lots? And the reality is probably not. And then for those that you could put it on, well, where would it be? And then where could it end up on that lot? So I think that goes, and I'm not speaking for you, Councilmember Pryor, but I mean, how do you maintain the integrity of what you love about the downtown? Well, let's see what this would look like and see if it impacts it in a visual way. So those are my thoughts. And I would agree with Commissioner Arth. I mean, there's a lot of parts of town that just won't touch because HOAs, not all of them, but a lot of them won't allow it. Some of them may not have language sufficient enough to restrict, but a number of them would. And even if they did, it might be helpful to pick a traditional residential lot. Apply the rules, what would it look like? You can pick my lot, put it on there. I have no idea if I'd even think about it, but could I even do it? I don't know. Probably not. Well, I don't think I could, because I'm not a half acre, per the restrictions you have right now, right? So I know I'm not a half acre.
That is correct.
So I'd have to come in with a PDP if I wanted to do it.
We're happy to help you with that process. Yes. No, that sounds fine. That's
So,
great. That's great direction.
There are so many areas of our town that would not be touched by an ADU under these current restrictions. And principally.
Under the proposed restrictions.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Principally because of the half acre limitation that it has, I mean, because I'm thinking that most residential lots, most, not all, are smaller than a half acre. So, anyway.
Okay. Are you
Yeah, I'm
ready?
done. That was
Okay.
great. Thanks.
Well, okay, before, I think getting some clarification on what other cities are doing and some idea, not only of what it would look like, but I know on the other side of Donovan, there's some people who built some rather large detached structures and are using, I think some of them are using like the upstairs of 3-car garages as lofts. That's what it looks like, I don't know. But maybe showing what people are already doing would be helpful. But before we give staff any more work to do on this, I want to do a straw poll. So thumbs up, thumbs down. Who is in favor of continuing this discussion? Okay, okay. Okay. Okay,
Just because I think it's important.
yep,
I think it's important to, going from the current requirements that are, a lot of them are almost non-existent, to having requirements. I want to see requirements in place. I don't necessarily want to see a ton of ADUs in downtown, but like you said, it's probably not going to contribute to an influx of applications for ADUs. But I do want to see some stricter requirements in place. So I am in support of furthering the
okay, she
discussion.
just went over Councilmember Hodges. So we are in favor of continuing the discussion. Hey, you too. So, so we are in favor of continuing that. That's good. So just right now, should we continue to the discussion of having detached ADUs downtown, or should we get rid of the thought of any ADUs downtown, or maybe just go with they have to be attached? Real quick thoughts.
I'm okay with detached as long as the lot size is large enough.
Okay,
So
I'm
that's
just
my-
trying to get a
that's
feel
my
of where
personal-
everybody's at.
I just
okay?
don't want a detached one on a small lot at all. That's my opinion.
Okay. Okay, so, okay.
Really narrow.
Okay. And so let me ask this, going to the zoning on proposed requirements, thumbs up, thumbs down, half acre, is that too big or too small? I'm making the assistant city manager nervous. Okay.
How many, are there a lot of lot sizes in Lee Summit that are over a half an acre? I don't feel
Yeah,
like there
and so
are.
that's a great question. So the half-acre lots, agriculture district's going to be 10-acre minimum. RDR is 1 acre, and RLL is half acre. The R1 is 8,400 square feet. So you're really only talking RLL and RDR.
Okay.
If you want to, now you might have a larger lot and happens to be zoned R1, so that's why we wrote half acre and has that other zoning. You know what I mean? It's not just half acre period, but if you just wanted to make it across the board, you have to be half acre and zoned RLL and RDR and ag, you can do that as well, but if that makes sense. So you have to be, because this was a discussion last time, so it was you have to meet both criteria. You're half acre in size or larger, and your zone ag, RDR, RLL, R1, and RP1. So that reduces that number, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm good with the half acre, given that.
Okay, even in the downtown area.
Well, it doesn't say half acre in downtown area.
No, downtown is, yeah,
It
downtown
says
is.
in
Downtown,
downtown,
okay,
it doesn't
okay.
give a minimum lot, which I'd like to see a minimum lot requirement in downtown, but yeah,
Okay.
I'm good with the
Well,
half acre.
and that's something we can have more discussion on, okay?
Chair,
Yeah,
let
Councilmember.
me, actually, can I get some clarity on what you just said about half acre? So I'm looking at proposed requirements. Okay, PDP approval, number 1, or half acre, number 2, or larger lots. And this is where you were saying that I don't know what larger lots are, but maybe there's minimum requirements for each zoning designation. And then 4 was single-family lots in downtown. Those are the. am I-
Actually, let me pull this up for you because it's a little bit different than what, this might be more clarity for you. So the 3 options are you're located in downtown as shown as the map,
That's 1A, right?
or you're half acre in size or bigger, but you also have to be zoned
Okay.
ag, RDR, RL, R1,
Okay, so
RP1.
that was, you were saying that, but I was reading your
Yeah.
summary and it was a little different.
You
Sorry.
you have to be both.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got
it looks different and looks a little weird in the chart, but that's why.
Okay, got it. So now I see 3 categories. Downtown, PDP, or half acre or larger, and
With the edit
zoned a
zoning.
certain way. Okay. Generally, I think now, in response to you, I'm fine with exploring these parameters. I'm just kind of now looking around town to see what kind of half acre lots, what they look like, knowing that they're probably in an HOA if they're close. So anyway, I'm fine with moving forward with direction to look at this as a requirement. These requirements, as we've been presented with them, we kind of just keep fleshing it out.
And we can, thank you for that, and we can come back, once we get more information. And if you all are still uncomfortable, we can increase the acre size,
No?
okay? Okay, all right. Everybody fine? Okay, okay.
Avenue, is that what you're talking about?
Big, especially with,
This is about a half acre.
Full downtown?
the downtown. And
That one's.
like I said, I'm not completely opposed, I just want to make sure that we get it right before,
Well, and.
but I do like the added restrictions, so.
Well, and if we get through this next time and we decide, we want to take the old downtown off, we'll do that for now and see what happens. Okay? So
I think-
nothing's written in stone right now?
I think seeing a minimum lot, just seeing what, yeah, but no, I think, I think.
Okay.
Do you mind if I repeat back a little bit of some of the core items that we'll return with?
Oh, sure.
So what I have is explore a minimum lot size restriction possibly for downtown, or maybe it's a PDP process, or I'll throw out a term, they're called junior ADUs, where it's smaller than what's allowed in some lots. Yeah. So, but just explore a minimum lot size for downtown area and possibly provide a map so we can show just like at what our average lot size is or what our average zoning and such like that. Just a little more detail on what our properties look like in downtown. And then also, are there examples of other cities that specifically address downtown with ADUs? And then provide some just examples of a site layout, 2 or 3 of what that would look like. And then a chart on what other cities in general are doing in the metro. Does that sound right?
That sounds good. You guys okay with that?
Okay.
Great. Thank you
you.
very much. It's 6:13. Do you all need to take a real quick break or want to keep going? Mr. Elam, remember when you told me the first 2 items will be really quick? Do you remember that? That first one was really quick. Let me just say that. And now we are moving on to presentation, economic development incentive policy, a continuation of our last meeting. Mr. Elam.
All right, Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for your time today. I'm Ryan Elam. I'm the Assistant City Manager, or one of the Assistant City Managers here at the City of Lee Summit. and I will figure out how to work this podium. Not that I've done it once or twice. Okay, so again, thank you for your time. As Chair mentioned, this really is a continuation of several conversations that we've had. I don't have a full presentation, and the presentation that is in front of you is actually the presentation from last month's CEDC meeting. I just wanted to touch on a few things in this presentation real quick, and then plan would be we're going to dive in deep into the proposed changes that are all based off of the project history and the project and the conversations that we've had with this committee, as well as things that we've heard from the council as a whole. I'll also mention that this is a process that we like to do every couple of years with our incentive policy. And when we start looking at the policy, you'll see there's been a number of changes throughout the years to that policy. And we do think that that's important. And again, keep going, okay. And again, with our strategic plan, resilient economy and having an adaptable framework for economic development are some keys that we have as both key plan elements, and then also in the strategic plan, critical success factors associated with that. So I'm going to flip through this one really fast. Maybe. Yeah. So, incentives history. Just wanted to touch here real quick. Overall, the purpose of incentives really are to induce a project to occur or to provide some sort of a project enhancement through that. And that could be enhanced architectural items and enhanced infrastructure or anything along those lines. But every incentive that is utilized involves a public purpose. So I just wanted to hit that. Three main types: tax redirection, tax abatement, or generating new revenues for a project there. And then this is the other important slide here. The primary historical purposes, as we've called it, through the project history of how we've utilized incentives as in Lee Summit, broken down really by project type. Our commercial projects have really been to fund public improvements or induce a project to occur for a specific desired community need. Think of Summit Woods, for example. When that project came online back in the early 2000s, it was filling a huge retail gap, as well as millions of dollars of infrastructure associated with that project for the public improvements. The residential projects that have been coming through, since roughly maybe 2014 or so, the primary purpose of those incentives has been to reduce the uncertainty and lower the costs overall of the projects to bring in. And we can get into that a little bit further on some of the uncertainty, if you'd like, on some of the details associated with that. We've got some new data that Mr. Bushek just pulled from the county that is kind of interesting, but we don't necessarily need to get into that for this conversation right now. And then the industrial projects recently, the Skinnell project and a few others, has really been a result of growing demand and regional competition in order to get that type of project. And then a lot of our mixed-use projects have really been a blend of those different purposes associated with that. And again, these are what we would kind of broad brush lump a lot of the projects together as to when you kind of, I'll say oversimplify what a project is looking to accomplish. So with that, reimbursement ratios, these are a lot of the items that you will notice in the policy now that we talked about. Again, I said I'm going through this one really quick, and I think that's all I wanted to touch on that. So now I'd like to get into some details. I won't go word for word unless you want to, and we'll stop, and feel free to interrupt me at any time, because I know that this is the most exciting way to give a presentation, by looking at a bunch of red text on a screen. So as you can see here, originally passed in 2015, and then it's been amended 3 years, 2 years, 2 years, and now we're coming back in, I'm assuming sometime in July of 23 will be the next update. That can change. I just kind of put that in there. That's what that red text is. And then there's been several administrative updates to the policy along the way as well. Before I go any further, I do want to say one of the biggest changes that we're proposing with this, I wouldn't call a substantive change. We're kind of reordered a lot of things, just kind of as we've used the document for the last several years in our interaction with folks. There's been some policies, again, that have been added over time, and a lot of the text in here looks like, oh man, there's a lot of changes in here. A lot of that is really just taking one section that was buried, say, in two different locations in the document and making it maybe a little bit more front and center through there. So I'll highlight those as we go through as well, just so it's not a complete rewrite or anything like that. The table of contents, I got a comment there. Don't pay attention to that table of contents. It's going to get completely changed. It's all red because it's an old Word doc, and we're actually having problems with it. So that'll be fixed through there. So not a whole lot there. So we're starting the document off here with, we didn't really have an introduction and a purpose in the document before, but we had kind of this introductory paragraph almost about midway through the document. So with this, we just kind of repurposed that and put it at the front of the document. That's why most of it is in red there, and that's really existing information that's already in the policy there. The stuff in blue is just a little bit of wordsmithing, if you will, protecting existing resources and changing a the to an a. Nothing substantive or substantial or substantive. Again, and then felt it made a lot of sense to really start talking about the economic development vision through there. And with that, again, this is just some cleanup. We don't believe that any of this cleanup work through here changes the intent or changes the vision or changes what that says there. I did just want to pause real quick on this piece here on the vision statement for the Lee Summit City Council. This is the same vision statement that was in the original policy, to my knowledge. I don't believe it's changed. I still believe it rings true as well, so we didn't really feel a need to change that, and we hadn't really gotten direction to change that either. So I just wanted to pause on that and make sure that everybody knew where it was at and was able to kind of go back to it easily to kind of maybe refocus and recenter on things. I tend to do that. I tend to go back to the highest level to see, does this fit with what we said we're trying to do? Okay, this here again, we moved a paragraph because we moved some sentences because it didn't feel like it was gonna flow very well. On here, we did add references to the Ignite strategic plan and the Ignite comprehensive plan. This policy didn't really have any references to those documents, so we did go through and we added specific language to there. So specifically here, strategic economic development is one of the 7 goals of the Ignite strategic plan. Through that, there's 4 objectives, and then really we're defining and planning for that diversified economic base, and this talks about the focus of how we're doing that. So we really just took language that exists in other documents and made sure that it was front and center, included in this policy document. So as we go on through the use of incentives, only thing we added here was, again, we wanted to make sure that it supports the vision as outlined by City Council, as well as advancing the strategic plan framework. That's there. So again, this is where we get into, there's a little bit of just reorganization of things in here. So this area here, this policy statement got moved down into a new section that we created that consolidated a lot of those different policy statements. A lot of formatting stuff, nothing major here. I will pause here on the targeted outcomes. We added professional services, science, and technology industries, as well as the arts as being targeted industries as for the targeted businesses, because those were items that were identified in the comprehensive plan that were not specifically called out in this. And through the comprehensive plan efforts, there was a lot of work done on, and a lot of background and context information that to say, these are growing industries, this is where we have a foothold, and these are areas to focus on to continue to grow. And I know I was at a period in time when we were in COVID, but we did have a lot of community input and stakeholder involvement in that process. I think there was, well over 1,000 plus responses and individuals and everything involved with that overall comp plan process, as well as, I'm going to say probably at least, I don't know, 20, 21 hours worth of meetings with the city council on that. It may be. I think it was at least 7 meetings that were pretty substantial. So that's where that is. So we did have that in here. I wanted to pause here. Does anybody got any comments or thoughts on that? Keep moving forward, take it out?
I think, just an editing note, I think you don't need to capitalize professional services or science. Just my,
Probably true.
I just wanted to throw that out there. Any comments so far?
Yeah, I think that they were, I think I copied that specifically from the comp plan. So I think it's, science, industries, and technology industries.
Well, now we don't like the comp plan, so we gotta go back and edit it.
Gotta go back and redo that.
Or edit every copy of that. All right, keep going,
All right,
Mr. Elam.
moving forward. Again, a lot of formatting stuff. This section here was specific to considerations when talking about projects that are residential in nature. So you can see they're all struck out here. We didn't remove them from the policy, we just moved the location. So it made a little bit, so it flowed in the document a little bit more. We didn't, when we put these in there, this was the natural place for those statements to go. But we've expanded on that with things later on in the document that we feel makes a little better sense. But we're not removing those. Again, encouraging and providing, generating a positive community image. We got a little bit more specific here at the bottom of this one, based off of the feedback that we got from the council, from this committee last month about making sure that we're getting that extra associated with incentivized projects. So we're very clear that they need to meet or exceed the UDO and the design requirements in that UDO. So I guess, again, one of the things with this policy is we want to be specific with what we're looking for, but we also want to be flexible enough that it's an attractive tool to start working with. So, targeted areas for development and redevelopment. These are the ones that have been in here for a while. We need to update these areas, at least the descriptions on some of these, and that's one of the challenges with the document and having these kind of descriptions that we have in here. Some of it is a mix of marketing material, and some of it is a mix of policy. And so when we get to the community profile, that's kind of smack dab in the middle of this document. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is an area where I think that we could spend some more time on. Now, I don't think that should hold us up from moving forward with any of the other policy changes, but it could be direction that the committee gives to say, okay, update these with what's going on today, or any changes, or if there's any other additional areas that we need to look at, or any additional planning studies even that we might need to go a little bit deeper into. Direction like, we want to look at a planning study or a corridor study, that's a much bigger endeavor than modifying just these general overviews that Ms. Nassif can talk a little bit more about. She wasn't paying attention. So I'm going to move through these. Again, there's no changes there. One other change that we would recommend is to include the activity centers identified in the comprehensive plan as targeted areas specifically. That's, that's that information right there. But to expand on those similar things, or better yet, link to the comprehensive plan, so that's, these documents become a little bit more modernized to show their synergies.
Chair,
Yeah, Councilmember Falcon.
are you wanting some feedback on that? What you just said is, hey, should we update these areas? And I think sounds like you presented two options. One is, do we update these descriptions based on the current status? And the other option was, do we need to do some deeper dives on some targeted areas? And I would say, at a bare minimum, in the process of what we're doing now, the first idea, I'd say yes. If you're looking for direction, I would say let's make sure this is up to date. I mean, I'm looking at Pine Tree Plaza right now, so that's been a bit. It's not recent anymore. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and to the extent you can use language that may not bind the reader to a timeline, and maybe that's okay, but yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was taking my notes.
No, that's okay.
Okay, moving on. On page 15 of 45, so we're doing good. So as I mentioned earlier, we reorganized a bunch of stuff. So this economic development policy statement section is kind of a new way of having a header there. And thought process with that is, we had all of these different statements throughout. They were all things that needed to be considered and all things that we wanted developers to look at. This is where we get a little bit more specific on things in here. So the first paragraph was one that was just relocated. Felt it was good, didn't get direction to change any of the wording on that, didn't really see a wording on that. It fits with what we're currently doing. So when we go into the general policies here, the very first one on there, the reimbursement ratio. As we've talked several times, we didn't have anything specific in the policy that discussed that. So this is our attempt to address that specifically. And again, with the most favorable consideration will be given to projects that fall within the reimbursement ratio that has historically been approved by the city council for the requested type of incentive. Kind of did that specifically because of the way that we are tracking the projects now and presenting that information in the table format that Mr. Bushek has come up with. Makes it, it gives us an easier ability to kind of take these projects and try to compare them on more of an apples-to-apples basis through things. We'll also define what that means, being the projected dollar value of the incentive to the developer divided by the total estimated project cost, including the land acquisition. We want to make sure that that's clear as well, that is a cost, because we don't want to get a project where somebody includes the land and somebody doesn't, and throws your numbers all off. So just trying to set that baseline.
Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I'm just knowing that Councilmember Lovell would hit on that question, the land acquisition costs, whether that should be included or not. I mean, I would guess in most cases it is, if I'm remembering right, when the applications we've been presented with, and why would they not present it, would be my question.
Yeah, I would say that it's common practice in the commercial real estate industry to include land acquisition costs when considering a project as a whole.
Chair, I could add an additional thought to that.
Yes, sir.
The answer is yes, we historically have, developers historically have in every case. And we included that language just to be clear on the point, because we received that question from various people in the past. So that's included just to make clear, yes, we
want
intend
that.
to do that. And that's regardless of whether you as the applicant just purchased the property last week or a year ago or 5 years ago. It still has value. It's still part of the project, advanced as part of the project.
Say one other thing on this piece too. We didn't put, shall be less than 25% or 30% or 5% on this, because when we start talking about the different project types, that's where the chart comes in and the history comes in. We also have language in here that just at the top here right now that doesn't bind us to what we've done in the past. We felt that was important, that this remains a 100% discretionary legislative decision through these. And that's the feedback that we've heard from the council and the committee. But we also recognize that we need metrics to look at. So we're trying to strike that balance.
Yeah, because if I remember your chart, I mean, some of the older projects were above 30%, whereas we haven't seen one of those in a
Yeah.
long time, and I don't think that would fly by right now. Councilmember Felker,
No,
did you have additional?
I was just gonna say,
Most of them haven't seen this yet.
Yeah, go ahead.
Trying to find the right chart.
I just was gonna say thank you for including that language. I mean, I think from a I would think that we all know that's the case, what you've got there, Mr. Elam, that first paragraph, but I know you all know that as staff, you know, I think we all know that. But it's helpful, and I think just also reinforces, I think it both empowers those of us who have to make the legislative decision and realize, hey, you know what, this is still a prerogative of ours. Yes, you need, as staff, the ability to interface with the applicant in a way that gives you and that applicant some reasonable expectations, but knowing that there are times where the ball will end up moving in some direction or another. So I appreciate that you all have put the language there that kind of articulates how we should operate. So thank you. Thanks, Chair.
So just to make everybody that's watching, because I know there's probably a few people watching, aware, the information that was just passed out to the city council, or to the committee, I keep saying council as a whole, to the committee, is this chart here that we have started putting together that really goes into really our history back to about 2000. And we've got the different years, the acres, how big the project was, what the cost was, what the total reimbursement was, and what that total percentage was. And then we go break it down further by tool type or incentive type. We call them tools. And then this is just a graph over here that can, you can visually see the different impacts. And so you can see some projects are 30%. We've got one down here at 1.7%. And then, 5%. So bit of a range, but this allows us to put everything into context. Moving on again, I am going to briefly touch on each one of these policy statements because I really think that this is the meat of the document here, that everybody, once you're familiar with it, this is probably what everybody's going to go to say, what are we looking for? So again, any project that receives incentives, it has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. That's a statutory requirement. We're just reinforcing it here, as well as all applicable city zoning requirements. Public benefit, again, we want to have that most favorable consideration that advance the future plan elements of the Ignite Comprehensive Plan. So advancing the future plan elements is really a different statement than being in conformance with. Advancing the future plan elements are those extra things, maybe those stretch things that might be in the comprehensive plan that the city has said that they're looking to achieve. So that's that signal to the development community that, yeah, you statutorily have to be in compliance, but we want to keep going further. Again, so number 4 here. This is our attempt to provide some clarification on when the incentive ask must come in through here. So if a project requires the approval of a preliminary development plan, any intent to seek incentives shall be made known to city staff and the city council prior to any action being taken by the city council on the preliminary development plan. Failure to notify city staff of the intent to seek incentives may disqualify a project from consideration for incentives. This is a result of the kind of the conversation that we were having regarding somebody's up here, they've gone through their zoning hearing, and there's been a preliminary development plan approval, and there's been no discussion about that, and then they come back through that. There's a desire to at least know that they're looking to seek incentives. So we just wanted to have a policy statement in there. We were also very intentional on making sure that it was any action taken by the city council, because there could be, if we just said before any action was taken on that could mean us even accepting an application or anything like that. So we wanted to provide those guidelines there. And we also are specific about requiring the approval of a preliminary development plan, because there are instances where that's not a requirement for a project. our industrial projects, for example, the Zarega expansion project didn't necessarily require a preliminary development plan. And we don't want to discourage that, but we're trying to avoid a very specific situation. Again, we're very, very aware that the annual appropriation and general fund guarantee not be pledged for economic development projects. That's been a long-standing piece of our fiscal stewardship here and the use of this. I also think that's probably one of the things that tends to get misunderstood regarding the use of incentives through here. We do not issue bonds that are backed by the city for development projects. Again, number 6 is the permits rule. And the permits rule is we don't want to have somebody that has received a permit come back and then say they need an incentive. That's been a portion of the policy for a while. And we've made some clarifying points here specifically for demolition permits. We're accepting those out if we're talking about a shopping center or something like that, and they need to do some light demo work. We have emergency repairs and things like that need to go on. So really, that's in there because part of it is who is receiving the benefit of that incentive overall. So that could be a tenant is needing to do that to maintain their schedule on that, but they're not really the ones receiving any of the benefit of the incentive. That maybe it's going towards the site work or the infrastructure or something along those lines.
Well, and just in looking at this, so I know I've seen around town some places where developers have cleared out acreage of land. They've cleared out all the brush and the trees, and they don't know what's going to be. They don't seemingly have a plan. So they can go ahead and do this, and then when they have a plan, ask for an incentive, right?
Yes, with land disturbance permits being a permitted exception.
Yeah.
And part of that really is a lot of timing, more so than anything else on that. And that's, I believe that was an existing in the policy that way. And that's why it's in red, because I moved it from another portion of the document into this. The portion in orange and, what is that, turquoise? Bluish, are a little different. Number 7 here, that discusses that annual review of the projects. We're going to be looking at the performance of the development to make sure that it's commensurate with the amount of incentives granted. That can get a lot more specific with development agreements as we move into the implementation stage. This is just a heads up to all the developers that come in when they're looking at that we will have performance requirements that you need to be meeting on that. We may request an independent third-party review or financial analysis of the proposed project, and then some details as to what that may review, and then that they will have to pay for that review if it is requested. I have this comment in here: verify correct attachment. That's one thing I wanted to chat with the committee about as well. So currently, we have a couple of different attachments that are in the policy. One is our current funding agreement, and one is the application and things along that nature. Things that I would really consider are probably more administrative in nature. I would like to propose that we take those out of being attachments and have links that we're able to update a little bit more frequently on there. Still have the information available because we want to be transparent. We want to have the information there. Just feels like a more policy statement would be per administrative procedures defined by the city manager's office, something along those lines. If that was okay, that we didn't have the specific agreements, implementation agreements in there.
No heartburn over that? Everybody okay with that? Okay, yep.
Okay. Again, this is another one, number 9, very specific, may request review of available credit that may be used. Number 10, will receive comments and a statement of impact from the school district or any other taxing jurisdiction. If it's provided to us, that's an acknowledgement that we will receive that, and they will be there.
Hey, Ryan,
Yeah.
going back to number 9, why do we say may request? Why aren't we just saying we will do this? We will review available credit.
That's a great question. David, you got any assistance on that?
I think the basic answer is there's some applicants that we've dealt with frequently, and we know there's no question that they have good credit, that they're a good company. There's a handful of those, and the rest probably fall into this category. I think that's the best answer. I mean, there are clearly some situations where it's a known quantity, it's a known developer. They've already built a big shopping center in the city, and they're making a second request, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on, again, we're just wanting to be very specific that we need to make sure that we're differentiating between public and private improvement costs within the budget that's proposed to us. But we've had a longstanding tradition of funding public improvements. I say tradition, history of really incentives go to fund public infrastructure first. And the utilize of, again, this is a reiteration, maybe this is a little redundant, but it's, sometimes people will read the paragraph up front, sometimes they'll just read the bullets on there. So this is that previous projects won't necessarily form the basis for new incentive consideration, and they're distinct, unique projects.
I
based
could
on
add
its own
one
merits.
quick comment to that one. That number 12 was previously under residential only, and we decided it'd be helpful to move it up and make it generally applicable across the board. But that was a very specific point of discussion when we first plugged these residential criteria into the policy last iteration of the amendments, because there was a concern, and we were hearing from some of the residential developers, hey, you gave this package to the last guy and the last guy, I want the same thing. And so this committee and then the city council specifically said, no, we're not going to use that as a basis for decision-making going forward. Each one is independent. Not just residential, that's all the incentives now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing too. The way that we structured this section, and I'm backtracking a little bit here, just because we have our economic development policy statements, and we've got it categorized right now into 3 different categories, but it also has the ability to expand into different categories with this approach. So we have our general policies, and that's really what we just went through, was the general policies that these apply to no matter what type of project you're bringing in. These are the things that you have to meet. And then you see, okay, is this a residential project? All right, well, there's some additional criteria that need to be taken a look at for residential projects. And those are the criteria that were really added in 22 with that last update that were up there that we moved down here. So there's a little bit more words here, but the basic is need to be blight clearance, need to be public improvements, need to do a but-for test, need to have that statement of need for a most favorable consideration. And then, again, tax stabilization. This is one that is going to be given to projects that immediately generate direct or indirect new tax revenue. And again,
Mr. Elam?
yeah.
Okay, on the residential. So was this section added several years ago when the council gave direction for incentives for multifamily?
Yes, the most favorable consideration criteria, and again, I believe that was the amendment in 22 that was really a list of bullet point items, and it was included. We're on 17 now. It was way up here in the document here under strategic direction. These bullet point items here, you see they're kind of crossed out here, but blight clearance, public benefit, public improvements, statement of need, tax stabilization. And then here's that item that Mr. Bushek was mentioning that we've moved to that number 12 in that other section about being that, past history is not going to determine this one. This needs to be reviewed on its own merits. So yeah, those items I believe were that last amendment. Is that correct?
Right, those were all included in the last amendment. And tonight, he's discussing this. They've all been moved to other places, and some of them have been made general to apply to other than just residential. So everything that he just pointed out is retained, just moved elsewhere in the document.
No, well, I guess my point was, prior to, at some point, I think prior to when the council gave direction to, hey, let's start incentivizing multifamily because we think that's needed. I think that was not 22, that was like 2017 or maybe before that. So was that when this was added in as an incentive?
So I think the history
maybe
there
not.
was, and we've talked about this as the policies continue to evolve.
Yeah.
We've talked about this sequence of projects create history, and then history creates policy. Policy guides decisions on the next round of projects, then we revise the policy, et cetera. And so if you're to go back and look at the charts, you'll see that the city council started providing incentives for residential. I think the first one was maybe 2014, and we saw a number of those projects. And then the city council and all of us, with city staff, started discussing, should we include something in the policy on residential? Because we've approved several of those. Yes, we should. We did that in 22, and we've seen several more since then. So
Okay.
that's kind of a quick history on
Well,
residential.
and I guess I'm asking because, because at some point we've given some incentives to all rental communities, not multifamily, but, for example, a project going out at 50 in Todd George, right? So that was a decision by council, but it's not necessarily, is the decision a policy decision, I guess? Is that what made the policy, is council's decision?
Well,
Or is there a policy?
So with that, there's no specific multifamily policy.
Okay,
There's no direct reference to must be multifamily
Okay.
or anything on there. What has been in the policy, I believe, since the inception, I believe that to be the case, is the targeted outcome that's on the screen right now.
okay,
And that's preserving or enhancing residential developments.
okay.
And I believe that this was the only language that has been in the policy. And if you see, it's all about high quality of life, access to services, needs and services, and offering housing that attracts next generation and today's lifestyles. All of those kind of the broad brush residential aspects are really contained in that
Okay.
targeted outcome
Eh,
there.
Well, and here's why I'm bringing it up, so I can tell the committee, is there has been some discussion about, we've been discussing affordable housing for a year or so. Is there a way to incentivize workforce housing? So I guess I'm asking, because I'm trying to figure out if it needs to be included in this document, or if that's a decision that needs to be made elsewhere.
I think that is up to the committee if they would like to send a very strong statement. If there is policy language that's included in the policy that addresses attainable or workforce housing, what that would do is that would be a large signal to the development community that, hey, we've discussed this. This is what we are trying to achieve as a community, and this is how we think we can potentially get there. That can be a very detailed conversation. That could be a statement. That could just open the door for that. It's really, there's a number of different avenues that could go down at the direction of the committee.
Okay, and I really don't want to go down that rabbit hole at this meeting, because it's getting late.
Just ask a question.
Yeah, Councilmember Hodges.
I think it's along the lines of what you were saying. So I know that it's not typical, but I mean, is it a possibility to look into doing the single-family housing incentives? Because I mean, like, kind of like what she was saying, we're talking about affordable housing. Well, I feel like if we're talking about that and we have the ability to make it a little more affordable for developers to go that route and make them a more desirable price point to fill that need, we're doing that for multifamily, why couldn't we do it for single family? Oh, sorry.
I'll provide a first attempt at an answer to that one. So, like Ryan said at the beginning, we've emphasized anytime there is an incentive provided by the city council, there has to be a public purpose behind it. And the public purposes are usually fairly straightforward. A big one is blight clearance. A lot of the tools that we use, the actual public purpose behind them is blight clearance. So when you see an LCRA plan or a TIF plan, a lot of the CIDs, the actual public purpose behind providing those incentives is blight clearance if we have to defend the city council's action in court if we were ever sued. That's the public purpose. For all of the other residential projects that have not been incentivized in a blighted area, it's all been through Chapter 100. All of those projects have to be commercial to qualify for Chapter 100. So single family, not commercial. And there's a constitutional and statutory reason for that. Chapter 100 can be used to incentivize industrial and commercial projects. And so I know there's a little bit of a confusion here. Your apartments, residentially zoned, but from a state law perspective, those are deemed to be commercial projects, which is why they're eligible for Chapter 100. So for all of the residential projects the city council's ever incentivized, it's either been in a blighted area or pursuant to Chapter 100. Now, to get to your question, can we do it for single family? Only if it's redevelopment in a blighted area. We can't use Chapter 100 for single family. And there's no tool that I'm really aware of where you could do one of the types of incentives that the city council has traditionally provided for single family development, again, unless it's in a blighted area and the public purpose is blight clearance. So there's really not an incentive. And when we actually had this come up recently, there was a company that was attempting to pursue incentives for just a straight single family with some townhomes mixed in. They were not rental, they would have been owner occupied. And there's no incentive tool that I'm aware of that is available under state law for straight single family development, unless it's in a blighted area.
So when you say blighted area, I feel like whenever we've discussed that on council, when they go, okay, with blighted, I feel like the smallest things where I'm like, that doesn't look that crazy. Oh, well, we found blight. It's like, well, I feel like anything could really qualify for blight if you look hard enough. So, couldn't you do that for the single family as well?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah,
So it all depends on the facts and circumstances
Okay.
of the property, really. And the answer is yes, and the city council has declared some properties to be blighted, where if you were to drive by beforehand and look at it, there may have been some vestiges of an old farm building that's collapsed. There's some blight. It still qualifies as blighted if the city council wants to declare the blight finding. It's a legally defensible decision. And so the answer to your question is, depending on the facts, yes, you might be able to do that. And if the answer is yes in those cases, then maybe we could use that tool for a single-family development in that area for the purpose of blight clearance. That's a legally available option.
If I could jump in real quick. I think it's an interesting concept that we could explore with direction from the council. With that concept, though, I think it's not a straightforward answer. And the reason why it's not a straightforward answer is because of some of the things that Mr. Bushek was just saying. But there's also other options that we as a community could decide to go down. And we've not traditionally done any of those things. Some of those, and I'm just going to throw out, I'm not going to say anything. We need to do tons of research on what those are. But there are other programs that other communities have attempted to get into place. And I say attempted because this is by far a national challenge right now that is on top of everyone's mind. That being said, I think there's probably some creative ways and some creative things out there that if it was the desire of the council, we would have to spend a significant amount of staff time to really analyze these items, to bring them back and have meaningful conversation and a meaningful analysis on that. But we could go down that path. The way I would propose to do that would be to take the guidance that we've received from the comprehensive plan, the guidance that we've received from a lot of the conversations that we've had here, take that and have staff go and see what's available and try to put things into a context that would show what are options to specifically look towards some sort of incentivizing. And I say incentivizing being loosely because maybe it likely will not be a traditional incentive type structure. It would be more like a P3 public-private partnership is probably where we would end up in something like that. So happy to do that. Don't have an answer for that today, but long-winded way of saying it's possible with some research, but there's a lot of things to consider with it as well, including the long-term impacts on service delivery, for example.
Rabbit hole.
Yeah, I know. No, but I think it's one worth looking into. I mean, it really is. We keep saying it's an issue, but if we can assist in that issue, I think that's worth looking into. So, thank you for your answers.
Mr. Elam, it is 7 o'clock, and the council members up here are still freezing. So why don't we continue till you find a good stopping point, and we'll pick this up next month, if that's okay with the committee? Is that okay? Okay.
Okay, I will roll down. I actually think that we are getting pretty close to the end
Oh, okay.
of any sort of real, real discussion item, I would say, on this. Again, we talked through that. One item that we did put in here after specific conversation was the consideration for industrial projects. If you read through the considerations for the industrial projects, we talk about the level of the abatement, the duration of the abatement. There's a whole lot of items and information here. A lot of these mimic the LCRA recommendations that we had already put in that were guidelines specifically for the use of the LCRA tool. This takes a lot of those, modifies them based off of what our current practice has been, and lines out really what the expectations are for a lot of these developments. So there's probably a bit of a meaty section through there, but we talk about the amount of equity in there. We talk about new jobs and conditions for new job creation being a main goal, as well as job retention. And all of these policy statements are written in the terms of most favorable consideration. And it's not a scoring matrix, if you will. It is a framework and a guideline that can be used to determine how much in line is it a project with the specific policy statements here. Public improvements, targeted businesses, some of that is a little redundant, but put those in there specifically because if somebody's like, well, I want to just look at the general and the industrial stuff, it's easy to get to. Appendix, guidelines and resources. This is, again, the community profile in here. Great information. Just as we were thinking through it, this feels like a marketing piece that needs to be updated frequently. It needs to be its own piece. Didn't really feel like it was policy language. And it is an appendix section. We're just proposing that we kind of remove this whole section because it's really taken care of elsewhere. Again, with the policy statement that we already discussed about moved up. Now, the overview of financial tools and incentives, I'll say this is probably one of the greatest things about this document is the overview of how these tools work, and the way that it's been written and utilized does provide a really great reference to understand some of the mechanics associated with these tools and what they're actually doing through here in a relatively easy way to digest. Probably have to read it a couple times, but it is a great resource, and we're really lucky to have the person that drafted this. Pretty sure you drafted all these, right? In there, but it's a great resource, and other communities look at it too for just different tools. So purpose on this overview of the financial tools and incentives, the only thing that we really added there was we kind of changed the words to make it a little bit more clear and add the targeted outcomes as defined in the policy, as well as the strategic and comprehensive plans. Categories, there's, just as we started this conversation about, there's really 3 types of incentives, and that's the special taxing districts, that's generating new revenues, tax abatements, that's your LCRAs, your Chapter 100s and your Chapter 353s, or tax redirection, which most commonly is through a TIF, a tax increment financing district. So again, we took it into the category of tax redirection instead of just tax increment financing because of the way that some of our industrial projects have had that public improvement assessment. It's really a combination of an abatement and a redirection. So we just felt it was more appropriate to have that as a generalized category. And then we do say it's most commonly applied through a TIF. I'm going to zip through these definition and guidelines. We didn't really change much here. We did add exceeding the minimum architectural standards of the UDO being a priority. This is in the CID area, specifically in relation to our conversation around blighted CIDs and the desire that if we're going to consider those, it needs to be for something extra for the community overall. Pretty straightforward on that one. Minor cleanup stuff. This one was one that we just put in here because technically project improvements may be financed with general obligation bonds issued by the city, but we wanted to make it clear that that's not our preferred approach on that. And that's a neighborhood improvement district. I'll just say we don't do that anymore. And then again, reiterating that.
Why are you
private
leaving it in
finance.
there if we don't do it?
It's part of it is it's eligible.
Okay.
And it's
Okay.
statutory. So
Okay.
we're kind of being factual
All right.
associated with that. So that's, and again, that way when somebody comes to us and says, well, the statute allows it, we can point to a couple of different locations where we say, yeah, the statute allows it, but we don't.
Say that, Councilmember Felker here.
LCRA section, this section has been bolstered quite a bit over the years with that. A lot of great information in there, not really proposing any changes through there. Implementation conditions and everything. That's probably our most detailed section is the LCRA overall. Added sales tax exemption on construction materials is a specific call out for Chapter 100s based off of our use, how that has been occurring. And then, again, to finance public and private improvements. Just a little cleanup here. We had the city purchases machinery, and that could be construed a little bit as like we're physically giving cash for these machinery, and really it's we're holding title to that machinery in order to implement the thing. So that was just a clarification there. Extraordinary qualification criteria. This was moved from another place in the area, but really that is around creating the jobs, creating additional direct general fund revenue, and historic preservation was also an extraordinary criteria that was already in the document. This was an area that was just repeated. It was in the document twice. I'm almost done, I promise. TIF cleanup. This is a weird formatting thing. That word is weird. I had to throw it in there. If you can tell me what it says, I'd appreciate it, because I'm not even sure I know what that little piece says. We got to fix the formatting on that.
They's gonna come back and go, council approved it, I don't know.
Again, we had site-specific incentives, and it was just repeated, so we just renamed that to local incentive tools to really indicate that that's not a state program. This is a local program through there, and that's not used that often, but it is an option, and it's a tool that we have in our tool belt. And those would be things like a sales tax reimbursement. All right, I promise this is the last thing. Application and review process through here. Kind of just streamlined this a little bit, added some language to really kind of follow what it is that our process has been for the last couple of years through here. So again, this is, I would consider this all cleanup items. Again, how we are wanting the applicant to request a pre-application meeting, and a lot of this is in reference to with the city manager's office, and that'll be David and I have just for position purposes, but meet, figure out the general gist of the project, and then move into more formal notification in writing with a project narrative and application that's got the basic information so we can actually review that, as well as additional supporting information. And we really like to have that pre-application meeting, because if it's a simple project, then we can, maybe we need a lot less than if it's a Discovery Park project. We're gonna need a lot more information on that, but the generalized process is the same. We meet, we determine what ballpark we're in on things, we determine what information is gonna be required, then we determine based off of that, how does it fit with the policy? The way that we have this written now is that we're gonna allow anybody that wants to make a conceptual incentive request, to request that incentive request. And that's kind of the default, and that's the way that it's been working out, is that the default is that we end up with a conceptual incentive request, and then we come back with everything further. We do allow, though, if somebody comes in with the base incentive request, and that base incentive request, I didn't touch on it much here, but it's really in that, at the beginning of the document, there's a table that lists out different project types for the areas of focus. If they're looking for 50% certificate of qualification, 50% of the increment for 10 years, the policy would say that can go straight to final documents for council approval on there. If it's above that, then it requires a conceptual. So we're just kind of changing that up a little bit based off of the feedback that we've received. And we still do want to provide that option for those individuals, and that's really their decision if they want to, if it's some minor type, if I say minor type request. They're all individual, but hopefully that makes sense. And again, that's really just clarifying the process that we're currently doing. And then this was something that we moved. We moved this general policy, so you kind of see the flow of the document, how there was policy statements, then there was a appendix, then there was other policy statements, and a process, then other policy statements. We just kind of moved that around. And then here we are, we're done now. Here's the pre-application worksheet. Not a whole lot of changes there, but wanted to have you see that you know there is an application. We never really include the application as part of the presentations or anything like that. It's really the information that we utilize to process.
Well, and I don't want to keep everybody, but I am going to ask a question. On the CID section, we had some fairly lengthy discussion with council members Lovell and Shields about tightening that up so we weren't incentivizing people for making bad business decisions. Do you feel like whatever changes you made in that section helps out with that?
So I'm trying to think through this particular section. We read through it a couple of times, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure that we thought that there was good language that we could put in the policy that would help address that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
So a quick point of clarification to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Bad business decisions, meaning a company's coming forward and requesting incentives and they allowed the blight to occur, they created the problem? Is that the situation, or is it something else?
Well, no, I'm more thinking, okay, hang on. I see you. They come in and buy a strip mall that is falling apart and realize it's going to cost more than they thought to fix it up. So they come to the city and go, you need to help us. You need to help us. There was no maintenance done on this property. Or maybe they let the maintenance, it's an original owner who doesn't do any maintenance. Councilmember Felker, you want to jump in?
Yeah, nope, you just hit it.
Okay.
So my comment at the last meeting, and I'll repeat it here because I think this is maybe the best that we can do on this issue, is for the age shopping center CIDs that we've seen, I think the main issue, and it hasn't been discussed too thoroughly at the council meetings, but we've discussed it with the applicants before they get to that point. A lot of times they're locked into the lease structure that already exists in those shopping centers. And so their hands are tied to some extent based on the revenue stream that flows to the company based on those long-term leases. And it's usually a mix of some of the leases still have 3 years, some have 5 years, some have 10 years, and so on. And so it produces a restricted revenue stream for the company. And so there's a limited amount of revenue, and the only option that they have, I mean, this is the position they've advanced, the only option they have to generate new revenue, it's one of two things. They can change out their tenants or increase the rent to receive more revenue, which then results in increased prices to the shoppers and the users of the shopping center, or they can add an additional sales tax on, which is a new revenue stream that allows them to receive a new bank loan to refresh the center and use that revenue to repay that bank loan. And so I think what's going on is, based on the age shopping centers, they're sort of locked into their revenue stream, and thus we see those requests. Now, trying to now put the additional layer of your question on, have they made a bad business decision? It's really case by case, and it's hard to evaluate, but I think that's the situation that we're seeing with some of the age shopping centers. Does that's almost the best answer we can provide on that.
I mean, I remember this explanation that you said in a previous meeting that I watched at my esteemed chair's suggestion. But yeah, I mean, I think it's something we're gonna have to be willing to confront it when it comes. I mean, and the hard part is it really takes a council that's willing to look and see that for what it is. I don't know. I mean, and again, I think another comment made in a previous meeting was, well, why does a certain strip owner of a strip mall structure, if you will, resurface their buildings and we don't see them, but then someone else is asking for the same things. That's really hard. To be very honest, it's really hard to sit there and evaluate that and know, well, why did they not ask, but they did it?
I think the answer is, and it almost has to be, if you think about it, it's the economics behind that shopping center versus the other ones that we've received the requests on. And, we really don't have the ability to go to those shopping centers and say, hey, why didn't you request a CID? But the answer is going to be in the economics of their situation. I mean,
Well, and that then goes back to, well, where was the bad business decision made?
Yeah, and I
Or
think.
one that you could foresee or not. I mean, sometimes I know you can't foresee it.
And I
but-
think that ultimately, in my opinion, from my experience, ultimately circles back to the lease structure that's in place and the revenue stream that's in place for that particular shopping center, which could then go to good versus bad business decisions and making, good business decisions. They factor that into their leases, the renewal of their leases, the rents they charge, et cetera. I mean, ultimately, the answer is economic in my mind.
Well, and I think maybe to go back to the point is, if the council has been approving CIDs, then the buyer of the structure can look at that lease structure and say, well, this council's willing. I'll buy it because I'm going to go get that pack. It's a business decision.
And so I'll say we have had potential applicants or potential buyers that have approached us, and we've had exactly those discussions. And what we said to them is, you have the option to go to the city council and make your request before you make your purchase. It's not a guarantee that the city council is going to approve this incentive. It's always case by case. And that's sort of that's some of the vetting that we do at the front end well before you even hear about that project coming forward.
No, and I think I speak for myself. I appreciate that conversation is had because we have given incentives. I look at a few of them recently and I think, oh, maybe you shouldn't have done that one. Or if I would have been more thoughtful, would have asked some different questions or said, is that percentage reimbursement ratio too high? And I'm just thinking of one in particular. But anyway, so I'm glad that and I, again, wouldn't expect differently, but having that kind of preliminary conversation, hopefully that quells some who might be. But again, I think it really comes back down to us having the conversation as a council when we see it. And does it smell like it? Does it look like it? Then maybe in those instances, we might have to make a harder decision in those moments.
Yeah, as I'm kind of replaying the conversation from last week and now this dialogue here, one of the things that comes to my mind a little bit is really in the implementation side of any of these blighted CIDs. If it is chosen, I think back through our ones that we have done, perhaps there's a way that we strengthen some requirements or throw on, that's the wrong term, put some different conditions in the development agreement to require those additional architectural standards or additional review, or perhaps there's the permitting side of it, because right now, depending upon the project, it may not require a permit, really. Parking lot resurfacing doesn't require a permit. Really, facade work doesn't require a permit associated on that. So if they're not doing substantial changes to the facility, that is something that we could consider, and perhaps we have a conversation about that, and maybe if they're seeking a blighted CID, then they need to follow a preliminary development plan process, or something along those lines to be connected into that, to make sure that the community and the council is getting what has been discussed.
And I know you said you'd already kind of thought through this, and maybe at the end of our conversation today, we're gonna be telling you to go ahead with taking this up another level, but maybe there still is something more we could layer into the CID language that kind of says something like that. I don't know, maybe that's part of an answer or gives us some
So
mechanism.
there are some projects that I've worked on in other cities, including some of our neighboring cities, where they approved CIDs for shopping center rehabilitation, and the city decided to be very, very specific regarding exactly what needed to happen and in what sequence, and that's something that we could consider here. I've never received that sort of feedback from the city council on our previous CIDs, but I can tell you that I've done that in some other cases where the city has said, you must do this, and this must happen first before you do these other things. So we can get really specific if you want to address that issue, and I've done that before.
And what I've done also before in incentive projects as well, as especially when you're rehabilitating, we would specify exact expectations for architecture, building materials. Maybe someone comes through and they're only talking about a facade improvement, but the parking lot should be improved. There's landscaping that's not in place, or code requirements that we have in place today, like buffers or tree islands and things that didn't exist back when it was originally built. And we're like, okay, we'll give you this incentive, but in addition, we want you to bring your whole entire site up to compliance. So maybe those are things as well. But I've done that before as well, and several DAs successfully.
So is that something the committee is interested in looking at?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Just to finish that thought, that's probably not a policy issue, really. That's an implementation issue. And so if we receive that sort of feedback from you on the next application and going forward, we can certainly do that in the implementation step.
Okay.
So, in order to kind of wrap up and bring this to a bit of a conclusion, I think the direction that we're seeking tonight is, given what you've seen here, one, have we hit the mark on what we had discussed? Are we at a point to where, pending some format changes and things like that, where you would like us to forward this on to city council, or would you like to see it one more time? And I'll caveat that with saying that we can break this up too, because I did hear, and I want to confirm direction, given the effort that it would likely be, the discussion on single-family incentives, if possible, I would kind of like to get direction from the committee as a whole on that, just so, because I have a feeling we're going to have to come up with a work plan and things like that. And I'll just say, I think it's an effort that is going to be valuable. It's like full direction on that. And then the minor issue, I say minor issue on the CID language area there. We can add that. If you want to see it again, we can bring it back or not. And then there was one other thing.
Well, now.
Targeted areas.
Targeted, okay.
Sorry, targeted areas. I think that we could move this forward with these changes and review the targeted areas simultaneously. So not hold everything up that we've talked about here, and then just do another amendment a couple months from now or so.
Okay, so going backwards. Send this on to council, sort of as is, but not talking about single family and not talking about CID, right? Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we could probably talk about the CID in there. I don't think there will be a significant amount of policy language associated with
Okay.
that. Just kind of based off of our previous discussion, and then I think the policy language would be something along the lines of another statement saying that specific performance requirements will be administered through a development agreement with a blighted CID. And I think that that would then reiterate the fact that each one of these are very specific, and coupled that with the ability to request the additional financial information on these. I think if we just bring a little bit more attention to that during maybe the conceptual, then we can really drill down on a project-by-project basis through the implementation of that. That's a lot of words that I don't really think you can put into a policy more. But.
Okay. So I guess the question is, are you all okay with sending this to council, or do you want to see it one more time? Thoughts? I know. It actually got colder up here. So everybody, and we checked on it, and everything's cranked, and everybody's up here going.
I just checked the thermostats. They're as high as they can go. I don't know
I know.
what the deal is.
I know. Yes.
I'm okay with sending it to council just because I think that I do want to hear other perspectives. I think that you covered a lot of what we have already talked about. But I do have a question regarding the incentivizing single family. Would that be incentivizing like the developer, or is that incentivizing like people buying single family homes, or is that something we discussed?
So I think where we're going with the potential research project and evaluation, it probably takes us out of the realm of incentives. Like, so you're used to specific tools that we use to provide incentives based on a developer request. And I think what we'd probably be looking at is some mechanisms that are more city-driven to, pick a word here, facilitate, enhance, encourage the type of housing that you're talking about, not as opposed to providing a specific incentive to a specific developer to achieve the intended result that you're trying to articulate.
Yeah, the conversations that we've had together just as staff is there's really no tool that exists. There's no framework that already exists for any of that, particularly if you're focused on home ownership. It's probably a more programmatic approach. And so that's what we really need to look into. Is that a community foundation? Is that a community land trust? Is that a community financing organization? There's a plethora of different options, all with their own set of regulations, red tape, and requirements and effort associated with that. But I think that would be the first step that we would need to pull together is what are some of those options? What are other people doing? What's the success rate of that? And then I'll also say that I think this space is changing pretty rapidly. I just read an article today about some proposed federal legislation that is specifically targeted towards this additional funding. It's just proposed legislation right now. So there's a lot of discussion about that. But I think that that's an area that we can explore. But I think Mr. Bushek's right. It wouldn't be what we would consider a classic incentive that we've used a lot. It would be, unique, creative, and we'd have a lot of control over it. And then it would be really what kind of investment do we want to make as a community?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so is there anybody opposed to sending this to council? I mean, we have room in our agendas to look at it again, but anybody opposed to sending it to council with the changes made? Okay, send to council. Okay. And does the committee, I assume everybody wants research, direct staff to research tools for workforce housing options? Let's look at it. Okay. And what was the third one?
I forgot now.
CID?
Oh, no, I think it was the targeted areas. And,
okay.
And I think that got answered with the one
Okay.
thing. I will ask Mr. Bush a question real quick. Should we go ahead and get a motion or?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Motion to recommend that the policy proceed to the city council for approval by ordinance.
Chair,
Councilmember Felker.
I move that this item 2023-5607, wherein the economic development incentive policy has been revised, be advanced to council with a recommendation for review and approval.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Felker and a second by Councilmember Hodges to recommend the Economic Development Incentive Policy as revised be sent to council for approval. Roll call, please.
Chair Edson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Pryor,
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges,
Aye.
Councilmember Felker.
Aye.
All right. Round table? Everybody's freezing. They're like, can we just leave and go outside? Real quick, our next meeting is July 12th at 5 o'clock. And I appreciate everyone's time and effort tonight. I know it was a really long meeting. I appreciate staff's effort. These are a lot of, it was a lot of words tonight. Staff, you have anything for roundtable?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the committee. Welcome to our new committee members. This is a very fun, very impactful committee. And we've got a great chair. But no, I did want to say thank you for the time this evening. We have been working on several of these items for several months, and so we're going to do our best to make sure that we're providing the history and providing the links ahead of time to previous discussions that have been had, and we'll go from there on different things. And then the last thing I had, in case my wife is watching, I wanted to say happy anniversary. It's my wedding anniversary today, so she's at a swim meet.
I tried to stop you 30 minutes ago and you just kept going, and I didn't even know. All right, thank you.